room. The rating room. The rating room. The rating room.
Hello and welcome to the Rating Room podcast. It's Jay and Andy again.
Today we're recording another special episode. We've got a guest with us today. Please welcome our guest for today, Stuart. So Stuart, thanks for being on the show. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Good evening. I'm Stuart. I'm in my early 40s. I live in Lincolnshire. I have all the charm and wit of Roger Moore, but look worse than Daniel Craig. And my favourite drink is Mojito, which is actually inspired from when I saw Die Another Day, and I thought that looked quite good, so I went and bought one.
Brilliant. Thank you for coming on, Stuart, and dedicating some time, to talk to me and Andy. So, continue with the theme of James Bond. Let's get into it. So, Stuart, can you tell us what is your earliest Bond memory?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange one. This says I grew up very much with the Roger Moore films. Used to see them on telly, but the biggest memory that stood out to me is actually Chris Tarrant flogging Kentucky Fried Chicken on a video advert. So I think it must have been about 9 or 10, and my parents had got a copy of License to Kill. I still can't remember how much of the film I actually saw because it's a 15. I think there's quite a graphic bit in it, so I can't remember if I saw that or not. But what does stick out for me is you got Chris Tarrant flogging Kentucky Fried Chicken with a prize of Bond experience for the day. So Chris Tarrant with his lovely Pat Sharp Funhouse style hair that he had selling it actually looked a bit more suave than Bond. He was some flogging a t-shirt. I think you could win as another prize as well. They never actually showed what it looked like as Bond for a day. I don't know if it was like, you can imagine if it was like Roger Moore's or Pierce Brosnan's Bond themed, it'd be quite light-hearted and tongue-in-cheek. I don't know if it's like Dalton's On a Path for Revenge is going to be quite hardcore or something, whether you just go into Colombia and chase down some sort of drug lords or something, I don't know. Maybe that's why they never advertised, because the person didn't survive who won it, but there you go, that's my first memory really of Bond that really sticks out.
I actually looked at YouTube after you let us know about Chris Tarrant's KFC advert, because I don't recall seeing this one, Andy, so I don't know if you did, because as I mentioned on my podcast, my memory isn't the greatest, but everything you've just said then, Stuart, it definitely hits home in terms of his haircut and the cheesy video, and it was like a helicopter experience, wasn't it? There's various elements that Chris Tarrant picked out on the promo.
Yeah, I don't remember it at all. I think my first time watching it would have probably been when it was on TV some years later, so I don't think I've actually watched it on video, so that's quite a nice little intro. I must give a disclaimer at this point that other chicken places are available. We're not sponsored by KFC. That's my my copyright bit done for the episode. So Stuart, let's talk about your favourite Bond film.
Yeah, so my favourite Bond film, I don't think it's the best one, as you see when we get to rankings, but it is the one I think is the most fun. And it does actually have a very good plot, which we'll go through in a second, is Octopussy. One of my loves as well is Fabergé eggs. Unfortunately, no one ever buys me one. I don't know why. They might be a little bit pricey for people, but it's actually quite a couple of Bond link series. I went to New Orleans. I actually went to the last Mardi Gras before Hurricane Katrina hit. Don't worry, we won't mention that because that'll probably push this well over the sort of 18 rating. But the reason I went there was because of my love of Live and Let Die. So I saw the old Fillet of Soul restaurants, stuff like that, which apparently don't exist. It's quite disappointing when you get there. But I remember seeing all the wrought iron structure and stuff like that and thought, oh, that'd be, a fascinating place to go to. And when my plane landed, there was a Fabergé egg exhibition at the, I think it's the Museum of Natural Art or whatever it is there. I remember seeing that. And it wasn't the one from the film, unfortunately, but it was, my love of Bond that took me there, and actually got to see two things connected to the films at the same time. But what I love about Octopussy is, I think it's a lot of fun. You've got a villain in Kamal Khan who manages to out-camp Roger Moore at times, which I think is quite an achievement. I think, he's cracking. Louis Jordan does a very, very good job. But if you scratch the surface, what's actually under the skin of the film is quite a dark and serious sort of plot. You've got Louis Jordan's character, who is quite happy to sell out his partner, basically let her get nuked to make some money. But what you've also got is a Russian general who's basically trying to start or reignite the Cold War by causing an accident that caused nuclear disarmament. You can imagine that someone probably would have thought of that at some point, something like that. Can we detonate a bomb somewhere and make it look like a foreign power's done it by mistake? So I think it's actually quite a dark film. And I was saying to someone the other day, if you cut out 2 minutes of like the Tarzan swinging, I do think you have to have the bit where Roger Moore manages to get a tiger to sit. I think, that has to be in there, it's, but yeah, I think you cut out a couple of the silly bits, and actually I would get rid of the opening scene with the plane when he's at the South American base, and actually swapped that with a bit where they kill the I think it's 009 at the start with the egg. I mean, it does get a bit weird if he dies, the egg falls out, and then you hear the little happy tune. Other than that, I think actually a couple of tweaks would make the Bond film even better, in my opinion.
So, Stuart, would you keep in the scene where Bond is dressed as a clown?
Yes, I don't understand why that gets such criticism from fans, because it ties back to the start where 009's killed in the clown outfit. I think that's the whole point of it. It's to, one, it gives him a disguise to get in there. It's quite funny. Roger Moore's, I think, one of the last sort of Bonds who are constantly going on actually deep undercover missions. I mean, Timothy Dalton's does it, obviously in License to Kill for Revenge, but in general, I think Roger Moore is actually doing a lot more spying than some of the others do. And I thought, I understood the saying the absurdity of it, because he gets changed in about 5 seconds. You know, and you've got a bomb that's going to detonate in about 3 minutes. But I think it does just tie back to the way 009 was killed at the start of the film.
That's good recall of the film, and it kind of brings back to our main pod about Octopussy, some of the scenes, and you've probably gone into greater detail than we have, so thanks for that.
Stuart, you know, in terms of Octopussy, obviously, you know, you alluded to General Orlov there in terms of the Russian general. What did you think of the villains in Octopussy? You obviously mentioned Prince Kamal.
Yeah, I think Stephen Burkov, not a very friendly guy if you meet him in real life. Actually, the first convention I ever went to, he was doing a signing. I took a look at his desk. He just signed it and didn't even look up at people. So I thought, I'm not going to go and do that. But I think in general, his acting is brilliant. He's he's very good. You know, he's just plays that sort of manipulative general. He's someone who isn't able to let go of the Cold War effectively. That's the sort of person he is. He wants, you know, to fight the West. He thinks, you know, if you get unilateral disarmament, that'll give him a chance to, you know, roll the tanks over, whatever it is. So I think he's quite good. Gobinda is a good sort of henchman as well. He's not over the top, and I think it's quite, you know, you got a guy who's a bit serious, a bit stoic, which again balances out Louis Jordan's campness. It's a good match. I think Louis Jordan doesn't have to have the physicality. Then there's very little physicality from Louis Jordan. He doesn't need to have it. I think it's a mistake Quantum of Solace made is the final scene between Green and Bond, where suddenly he's like, you know, having a toe-to-toe fight with him. It's ridiculous. What Octopussy does well is it scripts in the henchmen to do that. So you get very little there between, other than the last bit on the plane, with Kamal Khan and Bond. And I think obviously Octopussy is a mild sort of villain as well. She sort of gets turned as the film goes on, but she is a sort of mild villain as well. She doesn't know about the nuclear stuff, but she's happy, you know, to make all the money off smuggling.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And just before we move on, what about the Bond girls from Octopussy? How do you think they compare to other Bond girls in the series?
I think Magda is good. She's actually, I said this, is one of the creepiest lines unintentionally of any Bond film, where she goes, "I collect memories," which means she collects some scrapbooks. It actually makes her sound like some sort of serial killer. Rather than actually, she's got a nice little scrapbook at home. It makes it sound like she's got a couple of bodies under the basement, to be perfectly honest. But she's quite good. I think, as well, though, obviously the star is Maud Adams. You know, she does she does a cracking job. I think it's quite ironic because I don't think their ages are that near, but she's seen as being probably nearest in age to Roger Moore out of all the Bond girls. So I think, she does a good sort of. He's the nearest Bond's going to get in terms of Roger Moore's to a Tracy. He's not going to. I think you see Pierce Brosnan gets Daniel Craig get more attached to their women, whereas Roger Moore, you know, he just gets rid of her. And there's actually a scene in The View to a Kill where Maud Adams is in that scene. I think when they're down at the docks, where she's in the background. And I do wonder whether they scripted that in as probably Octopussy stalking him, being a bit annoyed that she's dumped him and ghosted her.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we talked about the fact that she was uncredited in A View to a Kill, and I do wonder whether it was just kind of to leave options open. So there's, like you said, it could be a recall for Octopussy, or was she playing a completely different character? Because let's not forget, Maud Adams was in a Bond film. Was it The Man with the Golden Gun she was in?
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
As someone completely different. So maybe it was a 3 for 3, but it was never fleshed out. But interesting point around how Moore treats his women versus versus other actors. That's something to consider. Maybe something we've spoken about on the main pod, or if not, we should.
I think my opinion is he's the most ruthless out of all the Bonds. He has a happy sort of smile. I mean, he's the only person who makes a joke out of someone as he kills them. You've got to be a pretty hard person to do that. But in seriousness, he's actually, there's a bit in I think The Spy Loved Me where he uses woman as a human shield. He is, I think, actually quite, there's a couple of times where that switch gets flicked. You see an Octopussy where he can be a bit quite curt in his response. There is The View to a Kill as well. There are a few films where he can actually be quite sharp and quite dark. And I think in For Your Eyes Only, you see how he kills Locke. He's very much out of revenge there. So I think actually Roger Moore is almost like a bit like the sort of Sylvester McCoy Doctor Who sort of thing, where you see it looks like a clown on the surface, but behind the scenes is a much darker sort of persona.
So Stuart, you've told us what your favourite Bond film is. What about, let's go to the extreme, what is your worst Bond film?
Diamonds Are Forever, unfortunately. It was toss up between that and A Quantum of Solace, to be honest. Just because it's a genuinely bad film, unfortunately. Sean Connery does one of his worst performances. It's a shame because he is Bond. It's I always say, if you're ever going to debate a best Bond, if someone says it's Connery, you're very hard to go against that, to be honest. Anyone else you could probably have a conversation about, but he's just so bad in this. He really very much stars the film in. You've got his wife's just been murdered, and he's having a little chat with, Blofeld. It's just Charles Gray, isn't it? I think he plays him. You've got OTT Camp Blofeld, who would even probably make Roger Moore look serious at times, in the role. After, like I said, the fact that his wife's been murdered, there just was nothing there other than the opening scene, where he's going, "Where's Blofeld? Where's Blofeld?" But even then, it's like there's a comedic element to it. The one thing I would say, which I think, obviously the song is very good. You've got it's probably, I think Shirley Bassey said it's his favourite song. That's very good. I think, yeah, it's a shame because there are elements where it could be a decent film, but I think Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wint are the only really, I think, good parts of the film. I think that they are genuinely quite creepy, but that's about it. To be honest, I just think it's quite a boring film as well, to be honest, to watch. It's a shame. It really is a bit, but the actual more lightheartedness of it actually segues quite well into Live and Let Die. Then, so you've got, I think, if you'd have had the tragedy of the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and suddenly Roger Moore looking quite happy, unzipping some Italian girl's dress in the first scene, probably wouldn't work as well. So as much as it's not a great film, it does sort of segue well into, I think, the film that follows it.
That's interesting, Andy, because we picked up on some of those things as well, didn't we? About, especially at the beginning, where we're saying, obviously, Bond had just lost Tracy, and we mentioned that, didn't we? How he was totally different from going from Lazenby, where obviously Tracy has died. And then those opening scenes in Diamonds Are Forever, we discussed that in that pod, didn't we? The episode.
We did, yeah. It was almost like the tone wasn't right. And Stuart, to your point around the ending of On Her Majesty's Secret Service with the death of his wife, you'd think he'd be a little bit more mournful, but you're right in terms of they didn't go too far with it like they would have done with Roger Moore. So that's quite interesting. And Diamonds Are Forever, I think, ranks pretty low on our list of Connery films as well, so definitely in agreement there. So you mentioned Connery and as kind of being a lot of people's favourites, and arguably that would be right. I've described him in the pod as the quintessential Bond, but who would you say is your favourite Bond actor?
Roger Moore. It's very close between him and Pierce Brosnan. That I think, if you look at all the films, I don't think Roger Moore genuinely gives a bad performance in any of his films. Whether you like them or not, he loves the role. You can tell that. I think there's some brilliant promos that people post sometimes of him. He genuinely loves the role, and I think that comes through. And his just style, I think, is brilliant. I love his approach. I very much fits in with what I like about the Bond films. It's not as near to Fleming as some people would like. I understand that, but you have to have Roger Moore for the franchise to continue. If you don't have Roger Moore, you've got nothing else. You had to have that step change from Connery. Lazenby, I don't think did a bad job, and I think I was brought up very much, to be told Lazenby was terrible and the Majesty's Secret Service was terrible. Being brought up by parents born in the 50s and 60s, that was their impression. But what he did was he tried to play it too close of it to Connery. There wasn't much there wasn't much to. I think it would have come through in later films if he'd have done it. Whereas Roger Moore is so confident, he doesn't even turn up in the opening scene for his first film. It's like, it's that sort of classic sort of Roger Moore thing where he's that, it oozes his confidence, I think, in Live and Let Die. You see the variety, though, which I think he doesn't get credited for, in, like I said, For Your Eyes Only. That's a much stronger film, and in terms of him being much more serious in it. And like I said, that scene where he kills Locke, there is a general cold heart, not just cold heart, there's a sense of revenge there. Yes, he's a professional, he's going to do a job. He stands down the car and shoots it, but then he just kicks the guy over the edge. He's out for revenge as well. So I think there's a lot of variety in Moore's Bond, and he paves the way for all the others. That's my opinion.
So Stuart, you mentioned about the confidence. Do you think the confidence came through because Roger Moore was established TV star?
Maybe. I think it's just his personality. There was someone, I think, who posted an article the other week saying about he wouldn't do Aspects of Love. I mean, he's apparently supposed to do this Andrew Lloyd Webber play sometime in the 80s and pulled out right at the last minute because he felt he couldn't do it. I think as much as he didn't give himself enough credit for Bond, he was quite at home doing it. Yes, I think there's an element of him being an established star, which I know some people have pointed on in the past. But there must have been a lot of pressure, I think, on him because of the fact that Lazenby, like it or not, had effectively flopped. Sean Connery's film had completely bombed in terms of not so much in terms of revenue, but in terms of performance. He was basically there to sort of pick up and save the franchise, which, I think he just has that sort of natural confidence, I think, about him. If you ever see him interviewed, when he was alive, he had a great sort of confidence and naturalness about him. Probably, I think, more than anyone else, I think, out of all the Bonds.
And one more question from me. So obviously he did the most films of any Bond actor with 7. Do you think he outstayed his welcome? Because by the time he finished, he was in his late 50s. So do you think he should have ended sooner, or was 7 the right number, or could he have even done more than that?
I think it's the right number. I think one of the things that seems to trend a lot at the moment is talking about doing an old man Bond film, potentially whether they did a one-off with Dalton or Brosnan. But the thing is, if you actually look at the plot of A View to a Kill, that is effectively your older Bond film. You've got some Bond who's near the end of his career, and you've got him up against the hotshot ex-KGB agent who's, in his, probably in his late 20s, early 30s at the time, and Christopher Walken. So I think that was actually a good place for him to finish. You've got, the whole St. John Smythe and Tibbet relationship that you wouldn't have had for any other actor. I think, that was a nice little dynamic there, because you got a good sort of, what you call ally or whatever it is in that. He was, quite fun. You had Grace Jones as Mayday. Yeah, some interesting stories about her on set, I believe. But she was brilliant. She was again a very iconic. You've got an iconic henchman. You've got an IH person. You've got an iconic Bond villain. You've got Patrick Macnee does a great job filling in. I like Tanya Roberts. Some people don't. And you've got a classic Bond song as well in Duran Duran's A View to a Kill. So I think it was a good place for him to finish. I don't think he should have done any more. I think it's I don't. I think as much as I think The Living Daylights is a Moore / Brosnan film, which poor old Dalton gets lumbered with, because you could imagine Roger Moore on a horse in the middle of Afghanistan looking a bit ridiculous, because he'd have been perfectly fine with that. It just doesn't really, and Brosnan could have done it as well, but it doesn't really strike the same chord with Dalton's more serious Bond. So no, I think that was the right number. I don't think you should have done any more than that.
And just before I move on to my next question, you've obviously just mentioned Pierce Brosnan was also one of your favourite actors. Why do you like Pierce Brosnan?
I think he has a brilliant balance. It gets sometimes tarnished as a sort of jack of all trades sort of tag, but I do think he genuinely has a great deal of balance. He actually has the most deadly gun barrel. If you see him, he's the quickest. If it's you've got no chance to draw that gun if he's going to go up against you. I don't know how he naturally seems to do that quite well. In general, I think he's the most balanced out of all of them. He can do he was as well. He reinvented Bond again. If you look at it, just as Moore saved it to a certain extent, or at least kept it going, Brosnan genuinely did save it, because he turned it into a 90s action hero, which is because they said up to, I think, Goldeneye, I think potentially the kill count Brosnan has in Goldeneye could potentially be higher than potentially I think Connor is or something. It's he kills everyone basically. There's a scene, isn't there, where he's in the library where he mows down loads and loads of people. So I think that I love. I think he's such a sense of style as well. Like I said, I had the Mojito because he had the Mojito. I've got an Omega. Not one of his, but I've got an Omega, because again, it's the whole sense of style. I did try a turtleneck once, but it didn't really work, so we sort of left that one alone. But because what you see now, Daniel Craig, it's weird style. I don't know. It's like if I was going to turn up to some henchman's, island lair, I would not be turning up in some sort of weird, virtually like dungarees sort of thing. He's got braces on him. I mean, what sort of secret agent turns up, on some sort of in the most impractical outfit? It looks like he's got a jumper as well. It looks like quite a hot place. And so, it's like, and they're in a radioactive room as well where there's a lot of heat. Yeah, so it's a bit. I think Pierce Brosnan was the stylish of all the Bonds. I think that's as much as Connery looked as at ease in the role itself. I think Pierce Brosnan was the video game Bond. He was the style Bond as well. I think there was a lot of things that he did, which again paved the way for someone like Daniel Craig to do something completely different again. Because if you'd have kept it with Dalton, I think the franchise personally would have died, because you couldn't have had Daniel Craig's sort of personality following Dalton's, because it would have just been too similar. So I think they really, all the Bonds contrast each other quite well.
So, Stuart, moving on to theme music of the Bond franchise, what is your favourite theme song?
I love License to Kill. Gladys Knight does a fantastic job with that. I think it's. I always like the divas doing the songs. I think she's got such a great delivery there. There's a lot of There's a lot of hit to it. It's she does a really good a job with that, and I think it's it just is a great tune. So you got a great singer, and you've got a great tune. It's probably one I think of. I'm trying to think if it's other than sort of Adele, it's probably one of the big last sort of diva deliveries of a Bond song. Yeah, it seems to be a lot more sort of bands, and I think they're always trying to go down rock in some respects. I must admit, personally, at the moment, I think I like Billie Eilish's one, but I thought Sam Smith's and Writing on the Wall was terrible. I think I think it needs to sit with a punchy song. You do get the odd ballad, but I think get a diva to do it. And I think Gladys Knight does a great job of delivering it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on with your analogy there, because when we get into the Brosnan era, it does kind of go more rock and arguably a little bit grunge, and then with Craig, a real step change with Chris Cornell, and then they kind of bring it back to the classics, don't they, with Adele and Billie Eilish. So it's a very good analogy. Speaking of divas of a different kind, though, from the franchise, who would you say is your favourite Bond girl?
This is where I lose any sort of credibility at all. It's the wonderful Denise Richards as Christmas Jones. I was actually looking, just for research purposes, for this podcast that we're going to do, the outfit that she was wearing, just to see if I got it right. And they basically have got her dressed up like Lara Croft. It's it's like the American Lara Croft. If you look at it, it looks like, sort of Tomb Raider. Now, to be fair, in my defence, what I have gone for is a very highbrow sort of person, because she's a nuclear physicist. Brosnan seems to have quite a few, he has a computer genius in one film and a nuclear physicist in another. So I just like Denise Richards. There is no credibility to that. I think if you're looking at it from an acting point of view, Diana Rigg is the best. She's but I think for my favourite, I just love Denise Richards. Yes, unfortunately, there is no sort of credible thing to say about her brilliant delivery of the role. I don't think she's as bad as they say she is. She does a decent job. I think it just doesn't look very credible. I don't think it's her being a nuclear physicist that's the problem. I think it's having a nuclear physicist who wears incredibly short shorts and, it just, fair enough, you might have nuclear physicists who do that now, but I think it just, they tried to sort of sexualise the characters, obviously what to do with the Bond girls, especially back then, but you can't really sexualise someone to try and be a nuclear physicist. Seems a bit out of sync, to be honest.
We've spoken about Bond actors and Bond girls. What's your favourite villain? This could be a main villain or one of the henchmen.
My favourite villain is Telly Savalas' Blofeld. I think he does a fantastic job because, again, if you go back to, I think, what I was saying about the way that Octopussy very much lays in the henchmen not having to do the dirty work for the villain, so they don't force the fight scene looks ridiculous. Other than, Brunt, who basically is, or Bunt, sorry, who basically is the Austin Powers one who keeps on, screaming, sending the clones, or whatever it is. There isn't really any henchmen there for him other than, the staff. So Telly Savalas' Blofeld, I say plays it like an American gangster, he does, but he's got that physicality. He very much is everything in terms of the villains and the henchmen, almost in one. But Daniel Craig's Bond, he's smart, he's got a very smart plan, but he's also got that physicality to take on George Lazenby. It's interesting though, originally when Sean Connery was still down to do the film, it was Yul Brynner who was cast as, I believe he was actually, I read an article that I believe he was actually cast as Blofeld. That's weird because obviously Savalas is like I said, my favourite villain. But I would love to have seen as well how Ramesses would have played Blofeld. He's a cracking actor, Yul Brynner. I'd love it if there was an let the virus go line. Like when Charlton Heston keeps on asking him to let his people go. That would have been quite interesting. But I think you don't lose anything in having Savalas, but it's just another one of those interesting Bond moments where how the franchise would have gone if, it would have been him playing the villain.
We talked about his physicality, didn't we, Andy, in On Her Majesty's Secret Service?
We did, because it was very, very different to what we'd seen from Blofeld in the Connery films. I mean, in some cases, we barely saw Blofeld at all. We just knew that he was part of the film, or we'd see an arm, or we'd see the back of a head or something. So Savalas being front and centre was quite a departure from what we'd seen for the most part previously. So, very, very different portrayal than what we'd seen in the Connery films.
Stuart, you mentioned Blofeld is your favourite villain. Do you have any other Blofelds, or what do you think of the other Blofelds in the franchise?
I think if we start with the latest one, I think Christoph Waltz is severely badly used, to be perfectly honest. I think it's there is a petulance to the character that completely undermines what basically anything about him, to be perfectly honest. It's a shame because he's a great actor, but what Daniel Craig would have done well to have a physical Blofeld, to be honest. Daniel Craig's Bond is a very physical Bond. Even though I did say the other day that actually he's the worst fighter out of all the Bonds because it takes about 10 minutes to kill someone. Roger Moore's killed them within about 5 seconds. He's lifted his eyebrow and the person's dead. Daniel Craig looks like hell after, he's got into a fight. But I think he would have benefited from, but obviously Dave Bautista worked very well. So again, it was that sort of complementing each other. And they don't make the mistake of making Christoph Waltz fight him. But I do think he's weak, and so is Charles Gray. But it's interesting, as much as all the Bonds are different, the Blofelds are radically different. Donald Pleasance, is brilliant in his, few minutes as Blofeld. Like I said, Telly Savalas is. But they're all very different, regardless of how you look at it, whether you like them or not. Each actor is given a completely different free rein as to how they portray them.
And, for the listeners of our podcast, me and Andy obviously ranking each of the villains as well. So you can check out on our website where we've got the different Blofeld interpretations as well.
Indeed you can. And another thing we talk about in our main pod are the memorable scenes from each film. So Stuart, with a bit of a wider range here, from any film of the Bond franchise, what would you say is the most memorable, or if you have a few, from the 25 to choose from, what would you say is the most memorable scene or scenes from the franchise?
One of the most memorable ones to me, it's not an action one, I think it's actually where, again, he gets a very bad rep for his delivery, is the scene where George Lazenby is at the ice rink. There is, you get that one in Diamonds Are Forever where... I think Thomas on the ball, can't remember now where it's probably for the ball, I think actually where he's been chased, where he's got shot in the foot. But you sense the vulnerability. I think Connery's Bond was always too cool, whereas Lazenby, if you read the books, and that's one when we'll mention with Fleming, especially if you read on Her Majesty's Secret Service, he constantly doubts himself. He's talking about how bad a scare he is and stuff like that as he's doing it. Whereas obviously in the films he is, and he's always brilliant at everything. But you get that moment there where he's genuinely terrified. He's like got nowhere to go. He's he's got all these people who are chasing him. He needs to let his superiors know a virus is about to be released. And then obviously you get the scene where Tracy comes up and effectively saves him. So I think that was what I had as a very memorable scene. I think it's one of the most powerful scenes, I think, of all the Bond films, in my opinion.
That's interesting because we've also discussed that, Andy, as well, didn't we, about the ice rink and Lazenby, kind of how he portrayed Bond in his one outing. Yeah,
I think the vulnerability is something we picked up on as well, which not something I don't think we ever saw from Connery. That just added a different dimension to the character for sure.
Yeah, I think Connery is brilliant because he is the stone cold killer, and I don't think, as much as I would love to have seen what Yul Brynner would have been like, I think Connery in that film would have been I don't think he would have had that delivery at the end. I mean, he's a cracking actor, so maybe he would have done, but it would have been a complete step change from his Bond. That might not have been a bad thing, I suppose, to see someone broken, but I think it's a shame for George Lazenby, because actually, I think it would have helped him in his whole career as an actor. If he'd have had 2 or 3 films, it would have helped him. I think he'd have grown into the role, and I think, he probably would have had a very, very different career than the one he had in the end. Because there definitely were some green shoots there, or someone who could have been a good Bond.
Moving on to our next question. In this season, we're obviously looking at the different gadgets that Bond has, and we've had the Geiger counter, Little Nelly, the jet backpack. So, Stuart, from the whole franchise, what is your favourite gadget, and which film was it from?
I like the laser firing watch in Goldeneye. Again, I wanted an Omega after that. It's Pierce Brosnan's is a fantastic thing of product placement, because you don't really know it's there. I think when they did Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's staring at a Sony Ericsson for about 5 minutes. You can clearly tell that's product placement. And the guy's driving a bloody Ford Focus at one point. I mean, Bond is not going to be driving around in a Ford Focus. So, but they did it very well. I think it just looked very cool, that laser. I remember playing Goldeneye as well. You had to use that in Goldeneye as well. So I love that. It's not probably one of the best gadgets. You had the exploding pen in the film as well. But I just love that. It just is a cool little thing, that that laser on the watch.
While we're talking about gadgets, do you think the Brosnan era went a bit too far with the gadgets? Or as a whole, what do you think about the gadgets in the Bond franchise?
I like the gadgets. Like I said, it's I think someone put something about Mickey Mouse's Clubhouse, and have like a secret tool that appears at the end. It is a bit like that, where you got like some gadget that's never going to work in any other thing other than that particular scenario in the film. Like Octopussy, he's got a pen that can dissolve metal bars. That, to be fair, might be quite practical in all the films, because he might get in prison at some point. But yeah, you got a laser watch that is only used for cutting the floor and is never used for anything else. The exploding pen as well would work quite well. I think it's quite good. I think what I was quite annoyed at when I watched Skyfall was them sort of, take the mick out the exploding pen, and I thought that was a bit of a cheap shot. I thought that you didn't need to do to the franchise. It's, if you want to be more grounded, that's fine, but I think the gadgets have a place. I mean, as the Vanish, as they call it in Die Another Days, a bit OTT, but it's a very, very cool car, and it's actually quite as much as the film itself is very disjointed, it's quite a cool scene when you got the Jaguar and the Aston Martin having a little battle between each other. So I think the gadgets, I don't think they're overly used in Brosnan's film. I think they you look at like Tomorrow Never Dies, he has the rappel he uses. You've got, they use that in Goldeneye as well. You've got the phone that manages to electrocute someone and open a door at the same time. It's and you got that fantastic scene with the BMW. So I think what they do well with the gadgets is each Bond seems to fit its time. Again, Brosnan was very much a computer Bond. I mean, if you look at it, the only decent games that have ever been released Bond games are ones with Pierce Brosnan in it. You got Goldeneye or Everything or Nothing, and Tomorrow Never Dies, I think, had that, and I think that's where. So for me, I think the gadgets seem to fit the Bond. So Craig's pulled them back a bit and started introducing them a bit more. So I think they fit quite well. I think okay, you have got Fury, as not Fury, so You Only Live Twice, where you've got the weird helicopter that goes flying around that Sean Connery can make. But no, I think in general, there aren't too many films where the gadgets go OTT. I think where they do will be on the villain side, not on Bond side. Like where you get those laser satellites, which is quite funny actually. Die Another Day is no longer as far-fetched, because they are trying to develop a satellite now that can warm parts of the world. So I'm sure Lee Tamahori, who directed it, is probably looking there, feeling a bit more smug now. The fact that it's I don't think we're ever going to be doing CGI surfing on the back of some bashed up car with a parachute. I don't think that's going to be happening. But at least, which actually is quite funny, because that looks more far-fetched than the satellite now. But yeah, so I think with Bond is fine. But I think, the only place where it might be a bit much sometimes is some of the villains.
Yeah, that was a good point, because we tend to talk about the Bond gadgets more than the villain gadgets, but that's an interesting twist on things. Now, let's just talk a little bit about the low points of the franchise. So obviously, we've been 60 plus years now of Bond. It's a roller coaster ride, highs and lows, but what would you say is or was the lowest point of the franchise?
Most people probably point to, I think, the hiatus for Dalton, but actually I think it's where we're at now. The fans are getting treated quite badly, I think, and the viewer public are. It's like they pushed the film so many times during COVID to the point of they were lucky it was people still wanted to see it, but it seemed to become a massive Daniel Craig ego fest now. It's like, apparently I think he'd had talks right at the start for killing Bond off, was eventually where they were looking to go. And I think that Barbara Broccoli seems to have this fixation with him. He's her Bond, the first one that she could pick. And I think, she seems to have some trouble moving on from that. And it just seems, I mean, it's like I was saying with the anniversary this year, instead of doing a nice new box set, it's not just for the fans, it would sell well. They always sell well. What we've had is the 1% sort of events. I think the highlight is some very expensive whiskey you can buy on the Bond site, or an Omega watch launch, which, people who've got a load of money can go to. They seem to be taking, I think, the fans for granted, and I think the general viewing audience for granted. And I think it worries me a bit like they're talking about reinventing him again. I think you'd look at Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise's character's pretty much the same throughout. You don't have to reinvent, you just have to write well. And I think actually, if they'd use the Moonraker book for the next film, so not the film, but the actual book itself, and having a plot where you've got some person who's supposed to be developing a missile defense system that ends up actually turning into a weapon would be quite, I think, topical at the moment. So, but they do always say they go back to Fleming, so it'd be interesting to see if they do. But yeah, I think at the moment it does seem to be a bit of a worrying time for the franchise, because yeah, it just seems to be more about the actor rather than Bond himself. And you look at all the great Bonds, you look at Connery, Brosnan, and Moore. They are Bond. They're not about Bond's personal life or anything like that. There are flashes of it, but whereas Daniel Craig's has come a bit melodrama, and I think actually he's the one who's outstayed his welcome. I think if they set up perfectly for him to leave at the end of Spectre, his Bond drives off into the distance. I did wonder whether she's going to get killed as it happens, but his Bond drives off into the distance, and that could have ended there. So I think it's quite worrying times for the franchise at the moment. I think hopefully they'll get a decent actor in, and they get some decent scripts as well, and they actually let the directors and the writers have more control rather than the actor himself.
I've got two questions there, Stuart, following your answer. What do you think the future looks like in terms of Amazon owning the rights to the Bond films? And also, in terms of the lowest point, what did you think about Daniel Craig, where his films had that kind of continuity, whereas previously each film was kind of like in a silo?
I suppose Amazon first, because they only own the distribution rights. I don't think they can push them too far. They've got a game show or something that's supposed to be on at some point, which is a weird thing to do, to be perfectly honest. I don't think you need the Bond verse like you do the Marvel verse. I think I do agree with some of the fans. I think it would be good to have a one-off. You could have sandwiched it in between, a one-off old man Bond if you wanted to put Brosnan or Dalton in. I think it would be quite interesting, because you could actually have a proper follow-up to On Her Majesty's Secret Service then. Potentially tracks down Blofeld X amount of years later. But I think Broccoli and Wilson are very much in control. And I think I don't think Amazon will actually have that much of an effect, because I think if they try and step in, they just won't do the films or something. So I think you'd have that massive problem that they've had before. I don't think Amazon want that, but I do think their patience will be tested if they don't release films in a timely manner. Well, they couldn't get the rights, I believe, to Spectre when they first did the films, so they shoehorned it in after Skyfall, which was a mistake. You didn't have to have Silver's character linked. I think they linked everything, and it would just seemed a bit too much. Then you could obviously have Lashif, I get that, but Silver seemed to be a guy who was just out for revenge, almost like a camp version of Dalton's License to Kill. He just wanted revenge, so they didn't allow him really to have a proper standalone film. Then it was actually everything was forced to be linked. And it could have worked well, but what happened was, I think people have mentioned this in the past, was you never had a Bond on a mission. Virtually, it was never you don't have that. You had a bit at the start of Spectre, and that's about it really. Casino Royale, you get that a little bit. He goes off the rails at the start again, but you don't have that continuity of Bond going in, getting his orders. It's all about Bond the person, not Bond as I think Timothy Dalton said, as a tool, which I think is probably how he should be. Depending, it's different in terms of how you deliver each time, but he is there as a tool for the British government. You can still have, and that's what I think potentially that's where the actor's skill comes in, is to be able to show a person underneath that role without showing too much. Connery did it brilliantly. He was a cold-hearted assassin. He was just cool. He was just as cool as you could get. Whereas Daniel Craig, I think it's like I said, it's been ego. It's fed in a bit too much, and this continuity has helped with that. So I hope whoever they put in next, they just have a sort of, you can have one or two loosely connected, but it just doesn't become then about Bond the person, Bond and his melodramatic life.
The Rating Room.
In our regular episodes, we talk about favourite one-liners, quotes, and me and Andy do a bit of acting there. We kind of get, show off our acting chops. Do you have any particular one-liners or quotes that you like from the franchise?
Yes, but I don't think you can get any acting chops from him. I think that would be probably that'll be a low point for this. I think be quite ironic actually following on from that question, wouldn't it? But no, I think my favourite quote isn't actually in the Bond film, it's about Bond. Roger Moore, when he's interviewed, says the Bond situations to me are ridiculous. So you basically have someone who is recognised by everyone, is basically what he's saying. He says, every villain knows his name, every bartender knows that he has a vodka martini. He says it's just outrageous. I'm paraphrasing a bit here, but it's he just says it's outrageous. I love that. It's his, he said he's basically a terrible spy, is what Sir Roger's saying. It's true. It's like, there aren't many people who don't know who he is. They all know he's coming, other than, in a few films. Most of the time, they quite clearly know he's coming for them. Yeah, he's not a spy, he's an assassin, I think, really, in a lot of the films. I don't think he's a spy. And I do love the fact that he says, every bartender knows that he takes a vodka martini.
Yeah, we spoke about this, particularly in You Only Live Twice, where his death was splashed all over the front page of the newspaper. I mean, that's, you say secret agent, but there's nothing secretive about the front page of the newspaper. So it's an interesting quote there by Moore, and he's absolutely spot on. One more thing that we also talk about in the main pod is any differences between Bond film and Bond books. Now, openly admit, I've not read many of the books myself. I've read the short stories, but not many of the novels. Have you read any of the novels, either the Ian Fleming ones or any of the more recent ones that have been written?
I've read most of the Fleming books. Yeah, it's interesting because one of the first things you get is like, who do you see as Bond? And actually, the one I think fits them the most is actually Lazenby. None of them really fit it completely. If you're reading them, you almost see different Bonds. I don't think Dalton fits it. I don't see that at all. I know that's a very big argument for Dalton fans. But actually, I think the one that fits it the most is Lazenby. But the Bond books... Live and Let Die is quite a tough read because it is quite racist in its language. There's no getting around that. It's quite a difficult read, I think, at times. But I think the classic ones you've got are books like, you've got Casino Royale is really good. And Moonraker is a completely different from the film. They do not go into space at all. I think someone just nicked that title and thought it'd be a good idea to do a Star Wars style film and with the lasers. But then you've got I Love On Her Majesty's Secret Service as well. That's a very good book as well. I think I've read Carte Blanche as well out of the other books where you got some weird guy with long fingernails as the villain who owns a recycling company or something. Because that's probably doesn't hit the high of Fleming. I think you clearly do see that. But some of Fleming's quite weird as well. I mean, the Man with the Golden Gun is quite a weak book, he didn't always hit the park, and I think it's the one book I would say is never read that book after watching the film, because the guy is completely different to Christopher Lee, and it's quite jarring actually. It's because Christopher Lee's brilliant in his delivery, and you've got a completely different sort of guy who's nowhere near as charismatic, and it's a weak book anyway, and it probably makes it a bit worse.
One of the things lots of people talk about, and on different forums in the Bond community, and we've also spoke about it on the rating room as well, is who should be the next Bond actor. So Stuart, who would you pick, or one or two actors that kind of spring to mind?
It's interesting seeing the article I think put out about Aaron Taylor-Johnson, so that's an interesting one. But I think if you looked at it from my point of view, I think you'd look at someone, if you want someone a bit more serious, you'd look for someone potentially like an Aidan Turner sort of person. Yes, he's most famous Poldark. He's in one of the Agatha Christie adaptations where he played a more sort of serious character quite well. But then you've got Richard Madden, if you want that person who could potentially do, I think, a more Brosnan-esque, or in between a Craig and Brosnan-esque sort of Bond. So I think he was very good in The Bodyguard, obviously in Game of Thrones as well. I think he would be quite a good choice. I mean, I would always have loved to add a Michael Fassbender or, Idris Elba, but I don't think that's going to happen. They're probably either too old or too established now. I think it's got to be someone probably in their mid to late 30s potentially, or early 40s. You can't have someone who's either approaching 50 or over 50 now. It's just not going to work.
From an ideal situation, Stuart, how many films would you like the next James Bond actor to do?
I think if you do it well, you can have 5. I think Brosnan was unlucky not to have a 5th. I think it's they just ran out of ideas. Other than I think Quentin Tarantino's interesting take on Casino Royale, which I think would have just had Uma Thurman with a knife cutting a load of people up, which because she was the one who wanted to play Vesper. But I think 4 or 5. I think it's you need. I think anything else is too less, unless you've got a really good actor. I think gone are the days of sort of Connery and Moore's number of films. I think probably 5 is the most. I think 5 is the most you'll get out of an actor as well. I think a lot of them worry about being typecast now. I think unless you get someone who is like Brosnan or Moore who actually loves playing Bond, you see a lot of Daniel Craig's quotes, hated it at times. So I think 4 or 5 to get the best out of the actor and to get the best out of the storylines.
Yeah, we've had this debate as well on another bonus episode. And I guess it doesn't help that the films are released slightly less often than they used to be. Obviously, back in Connery's day, it was 1 per year. So he actually wasn't Bond for that long in terms of time. He just managed to film a lot of films, whereas, Craig, for example, was Bond for 15 years. And Connery was only Bond for 9, if my maths is correct. So the longevity is different because I guess the gap between films is now greater. I want to ask one more question though before we get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast and talk ratings. Was there a film of the Bond franchise that you were really looking forward to for whatever reason, and did it meet your expectations?
It would have been Die Another Day, and sadly no. I remember watching it, he even had the funky, Madonna song at the start. So he had the brilliant bit where he's about to be tortured, which was quite unique, and had him tortured through the credits, which was quite interesting. And then you had, Madonna's wonderful, song where she meant to slip Sigmund Freud somehow into the song, which was interesting with your funky little disco sort of thing. People don't like the song, but I like that. Then you had the first sort of quarter of the first half where you genuinely see him trying to get himself back, and then he goes to Cuba, and then it all falls over, unfortunately. It was a shame, because I was very much looking forward to that. Just fell a bit flat, to be perfectly honest, for the second half, really did knock it over. I think if they'd have had the guts to stay as grounded as they did in the first half, they'd have had a very special film. Unfortunately, destroying a whole fencing club, and then, having, some ice hotel that gets melted, and then some guy with some very weird S&M style outfit that he has that electrocution sort of self-defense thing is very weird. So it's just a shame. I was really looking forward to that, and it just it's still it's not as bad a film to watch people say, but sometimes you do sort of get to the second half and switch off a bit.
What did you think of the main villain and the Bond girls in Die Another Day?
Halle Berry is badly used, I think, personally. I think actually she's outshone by Rosamund Pike. I think Rosamund Pike's Amanda Frost is better. I think she's almost Halle Berry. Yeah, you have that, funny, now there's a mouthful or whatever it is sort of line, but she's trying to almost be too Bond-esque herself, which isn't too bad, but she just doesn't really have that much to do. It's a waste of Academy Award-winning actress, to be perfectly honest. Toby Stephens, it's an interesting thing to have someone trying to parody Bond as a villain. But, actually, I think you'd have been better to have William Lee going throughout the whole film, to be perfectly honest, as Colonel Moon. I think it was a strange film. I think Lee Tamahori just lost it halfway through. I'm sure he's very happy about the article about the satellite now that can heat the world or whatever it is potentially. But, other than that, he just lost it halfway through, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Die Another Day in a future episode of the main pod, and I wonder if a lot of those points will come up because you make some very, very good points there. Jay, shall we move on to what the rating room is all about? Let's get some ratings involved, shall we? Do you want to kick us off with the first topic?
The rating room.
Yeah, so Stuart, what we do in our regular episodes, me and Andy rate the different elements each week as we rewatch the film. So we build up our rankings. So the first question to you is, can you give us your top 5 Bond films?
Yeah, so I've got On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think that's a cracking film. Very, very good. It's a brilliant performances around that. From Russia with Love, I have after that. I think Connery is best. It is probably the best spy film as well. There are very good performances all the way through it. It's you've got great, Bond, you've got a great Bond girl, you've got a great Bond villain, and a great Bond sort of henchman who, again, doesn't have to be massively in the film. And if you look at somewhere like No Time to Die, that's actually quite, Rosa Klebb is barely in the film, but she has a massive impact. So if you do it right, and even Grant is only in the background for lots of it. So again, it shows you how to do a film well if you're not going to have that many villain appearances. Octopussy, I absolutely love that. We've gone for that earlier. Casino Royale is a very, very good film. I think, the let's destroy a house in Venice at the end because we need an action bit is a bit bizarre, to be perfectly honest. You could easily cut that out. Yeah, I think it makes Homes Under the Hammer look like a hardcore version of it, doesn't it, really, when they're going through and destroying that place? Yeah, but it is a great film. And then you've got Goldeneye. Goldeneye, I think, is a fantastic film. Pierce, as much as Roger, is instantly Bond. And I think, you've got Sean Bean is a brilliant Bond villain as well in that. And like I said, it sets the template as Bond moving from being a spy to an action hero. That is effectively what they're doing there, and that was one thing I think his last move was Cubby Broccoli's doing that, because it was a fantastic, because that's how he made Bond relevant, was had him with the audiences who wanted to see a lot more action. So yeah, that's my top 5.
Stuart, was it intentional that you've picked 5 different films with 5 different actors?
Yes and no. Spy Who Loved Me is potential that could come on there, so you'd potentially have 2 ones as Sir Roger. But genuinely, those are, I think, my top 5. It's all of them are great performances in them, so it's nearly intentional, but not quite.
It's a fascinating mix. Speaking of fascinating mixes, though, how would you mix up the Bond girls? So, do you have a top 5? We spoke about 1 earlier. What about another 4 to go with her?
Yeah, so I put Diana Rigg, sort of Tracy Bond as second to the wonderful Christmas Jones. Then we had, because she's brilliant. It's a fantastically layered sort of performance from Diana Rigg, especially with the fact that they genuinely didn't get on with each other. I think apparently the garlic story, where putting garlic in her mouth, is not the way it was put across. I think they said she actually, when she was interviewed, said she just had some pate for lunch. That's all it was. She hadn't purposely said I hated. But that was a brilliant urban legend that carried through for years, that she hated George Lazenby that much that she put garlic in her mouth for the kissing scenes. But she was brilliant. She makes such an impact on there. There's vulnerability as well. She's not just tough person. There's some vulnerability there, so she does really well. You've got Triple X as well. I like that sort of balance for more. There's a female spy who's just as good as Bond, which I think is, it's interesting, because Bond is obviously portrayed as being quite a sexist film at times. There's quite a lot of pioneering things it's done with women in roles. Dame Judi Dench's M is a brilliant one, that we didn't get that many, especially with action films. We'd have a woman, in that sort of lead authority. And I think even back then with The Spy Who Loved Me, great performers there. I think it's a nice dynamic between the two. And then my sort of credibility falls off again, where you have Stacey Sutton from A View to a Kill. I just like Tanya Roberts, to be honest. I think again, her character gets a lot of bad rap. I think it really does. Yeah, I think she actually does a good performance. And again, it's she's quite strong. She stands up to Christopher Walken's and Zorin. And then the last one is Plenty O'Toole in Diamonds Are Forever. As much as I like Jill St. John, I think she's great when she's interviewed about Bond, but she's terrible, and they should have just put Plenty O'Toole in the rest of Lana Wood in the rest of the film, to be honest. When I think there's a line where she said, "I robbed you of a great night," and I thought, no, you've robbed us of a great film, unfortunately. I think it's just, again, that's probably more there for aesthetics rather than great delivery, to be honest.
So Stuart, just before I move on to the next top 5, would you like to see Bond girls reappear in the franchise, or do you like that they only appear in one film?
I don't mind, to be honest, if they do it well. I think Léa Seydoux was, I think, it's a very good actress who's probably done, I think, bad jobs with the scripts. I don't think, I think Madeleine Swan is quite good in Spectre. I think it's you got to have she's got to be damaged like Craig's damaged in the next film. It's all you'd love, I think, and it's a shame he never got it. You can say a bit like Camille in Quantum of Solace, but it'd be great for him to have had that sort of Maud Adams sort of character. I think that would have been good now. Have her appear in a couple of films. Or, we had Paloma would have been a great character to have had in multiple films. Obviously, she only appears in the last film. Ana de Armas, she would have been a brilliant. So I think if you get the actress right, there's no problem. I think originally, Halle Berry was supposed to appear in multiple films. So I think, if you have a good actress, there's no problem there. I think they just need to do the writing a bit better for them if they're going to reappear.
So the next one is top 5 Bond villains, and obviously, Stuart, you mentioned Blofeld is your favourite villain. So this can be any primary villains or henchmen. So who are your 2, 3, 4 and 5 in the franchise?
I was very tempted to put Kamal Khan in, but I've gone just outside of that because I do love Lou Jules. But I think if you look at the impact of the films and the performances, you've got Grant is brilliant in From Russia with Love. He doesn't really care about the fact that you should not have red wine with fish. It's quite funny because I think that's the most disgusting Connery is with anyone. It's quite a very subtle thing, but I think it's a brilliant scene because it's he said, "Oh yeah, I should have known you were awful because you had red wine with fish." But Robert Shaw does a brilliant thing. The contempt that he has. But what undoes him is, if you look at it, he's more than a match and probably better than Bond or what he does. He's completely played him, but it's greed. And again, that shows the brilliance of the Bond character, where he kills him through finding his weakness, which is effectively greed. Then you've got Our Job. Our Job is brilliant. I remember playing GoldenEye with the hat. I could never hit anyone with it, but running around with a little hat, trying to kill someone with a hat was great. I think it's just a brilliant performance. Our Job. He manages to, a bit like with Dave Bautista's Hinks, manages to deliver a great performance without saying a word. And then obviously you've got Jaws. Jaws is he is the iconic Bond villain. He again, a brilliant performance for Richard Kiel as a fantastic sort of physicality. It's a bit like if you had like the Resident Evil games where you have one of those like tyrant bosses appear every once in a while. It's going to be very hard for one to kill him when he appears. It's gonna be a big challenge, and you get that they did that very well with slotting him into different parts of The Spy Who Loved Me. And I love it when he appears in Moonraker. He goes, "Oh, he's Jaws. He kills people." Which is, like very deadpan sort of delivery of what he does from Roger Moore. And the last one I've got is Electra King. It's a brilliant, brilliant Bond villain for Brosnan. I think Robert Carlyle, I don't think plays Renard very well, but I know he's supposed to be cold, etc. But it just comes across as bland. Whereas you have the brilliant performance, for Electra King is you can tell Pierce genuinely loves the woman, or is at least very attached, and he still kills her. I think that's is a big sort of moment. I think in the Bond films that that's his Tracy, but Brosnan's Tracy is going to manipulate him. He's had 2 Tracies effectively. You see the dynamic between him and Terry Hatcher with Paris Carver, and she sadly dies, and then he has to kill the other woman he potentially loves himself. So it's I thought that was a brilliant. I think Sophie Marceau was a brilliant performance. I think she does a really, really good job.
Thanks for that. Now let's get into some main event talk. So the Bond actors, we've got 6 that we've had so far. How would you rank the Bond actors 1 to 6?
I have more top than Brosnan, Connery, but like I said, it's very hard to argue against anyone who has Connery top. Then you've got Craig, Lazenby, and Dalton. I think for the top 3, these are they're iconic Bonds. Craig is as well, but I think Craig doesn't have as much of an identity as he does. If you look at like Casino Royale, he's sort of like this hard sort of man who gets, softened. Then he's on this path of revenge, playing it like Jason Bourne. I think they did cool. I think Quantum of Solace, the Bond identity at one point was what they were calling it because of the awful fight scene they have just after the opening credits, where it's like, they're all like twirling about on ropes and that. So I think Craig's very up and down, I believe, in his delivery. Lazenby, you just never know, what the future would have held for him. I don't think he's a bad Bond, just like Craig isn't a bad Bond necessarily, but you didn't get enough, I think, from Lazenby. You could imagine the Hilary Bray scene, in On the Majesty's Secret Service. Roger Moore would have been perfect doing that. He would have just been in his element, and it's, so I think he was dubbed. I'm sure someone said he was dubbed for that, George Lazenby. And then the last one I've got is Dalton. I think he's brilliant in License to Kill. I just don't. A lot of people love The Living Daylights. I don't like the film. I've watched it quite a lot of times to see, have I missed something? But I just feel, and now I know it's not supposed to be, but it just feels like a film that was written for Brosnan. It really does. I know he pulled out the last minute and said it was rewritten, but it does seem like, to me, you could imagine Brosnan looking ridiculous like Roger Moore in Afghanistan on a horse, trying to dress like an Arab sheikh. it just doesn't work for Dalton. License to Kill is Dalton's film, really, I think. I think he's probably a bit too grumpy for me, to be honest. I think you could actually, if I had some video talent, I wanted to do Victor Meldrew delivering his lines, because you could have easily put enough together. I'm sure there's a bit where he goes, "You're bloody lucky to be alive and 1 foot in the grave." So, I think he's the Victor Meldrew of Bond as far as I'm concerned. But it's a shame as well for the actor, because you could see the love that he had for playing the role when he took it on. And it was just because he wasn't liked by the critics at the time, you could see that really took an effect on him. And it's a shame, because I think if they'd have been consistent and would have stuck with, what his identity would have been as Bond, he could have been a good Bond. I don't think he should have done more than potentially 3 films. I think his sort of style would have grated, I think, on the audience at the time. And, Brosnan had to be seen as rescuing Bond, effectively. Whether, people like that or not, who are Dalton fans, it was partly down to how badly, especially License to Kill, I think they adjusted it to inflation. And it was one of the worst performing out of all the Bond films. So I do feel sorry for Dalton, and I think there's a very good actor in there. He's been, he's been great in other things. I just don't think his Bond was consistent enough.
Stuart, you mentioned Roger Moore as your favourite Bond. What are your rankings for the Moore films?
I have to Spy Love Me as top, again, as much as I love Octopussy, which is strange because it doesn't go into the top 5, but it's very near. Then obviously I have Octopussy. Live and Let Die is a cracking film. I have that as number 3. It's one of the most overlooked. I think Octopussy is overlooked as well. I think Live and Let Die is one of the most sort of slept on Bond films. I think it's got a great Bond girl. It's got some great Bond villains. It has an interesting plot, actually. But, I think it was a very cool sort of, only Bond film that really dabbled in the supernatural. It would have been interesting to see what happened to Baron Samedi's character, after he's sitting on the front of the train at the end. View to a Kill, then, I like the film. I think Christopher Walken, Grace Jones, fantastic performances, and it's an enjoyable film. It's a fun film. For Your Eyes Only is a good film, and I think it's a great performance by Moore. I think for me, it's not as fun as the other films. That's why I like that. Man with a Golden Gun is really propped up by Moore and Christopher Lee. It's not a great film. It could have been a lot better. The book isn't good either, to be honest, so I think they didn't have much to work with there. But you could have done a lot better film with having, some guy who charges £1 million to kill someone. And then you got Moonraker. Moonraker is an interesting one because it has one of the most horrific scenes in any Bond film, where the assistant's having a Doberman chase her in the woods. It's quite a horror film sort of vibe there. And when you have girls are looking with that sadistic sort of smile when Roger Moore's potentially being drowned by the snake. So there's some very, very actually dark moments. Hugo Drax is a great villain, but it's just a bad film, unfortunately. The only great thing about the lasers is the fact that you got them in Goldeneye and you could try and shoot Jaws. That was about the highlight of those, to be honest, was they worked well in a computer game 20-odd years later.
Yeah, Moonraker is a dirty word on the podcast. For those who've listened to the Moonraker episode, you'll know exactly what my feelings are on that. I completely agree with your rankings there. One more ranking question from me, and that is around the Bond theme songs. So what would you say are your top 5 Bond theme songs?
So I said I love License to Kill, so I'll put that first. Nobody Does It Better is a great song as well. That is a particular song about Roger Moore's Bond. It's the song that fits that Bond more. You can imagine Roger having a song, wrote about him being the best. It's or his Bond being the best. It just fits his Bond so well. All Time High, I love that song. It's a very weird one. I was in Hunt Stanton years ago, and some guy was playing a saxophone solo of it. It's fantastic, I got out the car and some guy was playing All Time High and the saxophone was, I love that. I think, it's not one of the strongest ones. It's strange, actually, on reflection, there's not a Shirley Bassey on there. I could at least put Diamonds from Sierra Leone on there because, it's always a nice mix with Kanye West there when they do a song. I think I just like the song. I think it's quite a nice, happy sort of little song. The Living Daylights is a fantastic song by Aha. It's a really, really good and well-delivered song. And then we have another diva at the end with Skyfall. It's weird for me, the Bond films, when you go to see them in the cinema, because obviously I've seen from Goldeneye onwards in the cinema, the films sometimes set the tone. I hated when I first heard it, my name. So I was sitting there looking at my friend and said, this film's going to be crap. It's because, I didn't like the song. But Skyfall, it gave that whole epic sort of vibe to the film. You thought, we're going to see something fantastic here. She had the whole, it does show sometimes if it's a good song. I can't imagine how those poor people felt watching Moonraker. It's even, Shirley Bassey even hates that song apparently. So I think you never underestimate how great the song impacts it. Because again, with Writing on the Wall was a bland, but then No Time to Die, as much as it was a mellow song, had a good delivery. So I think the songs do have a big impact on the film when you're going to watch them at the cinema, I believe.
Fully agree with you on that. I think the songs, the opening scenes, the opening credits, like you said, that's really where it can kind of make or break the film, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely. I think it really does. Even the Brosnan ones, where you got Tomorrow Never Dies the Strongest, it had a really good opening scene. So the song wasn't, that bad that it derailed it. I think if you've got like an average opening scene, and then like with Moonrakers, you had like the circus little jingle just before the song started, it just really about it. So I think you're right there. Yeah, I think it's a good mix that sets the tone for the fans, and then it does get you in a good mood for watching the film.
Stuart, last question from us is, which Bond do you think fits your own personality?
I very much fit in Roger Moore. As much as I love him, also fits my personality. I've got a very sort of tongue-in-cheek. I do find a humour in everything. Sometimes I probably shouldn't find the humour in everything, but there you go. I just love his approach. I would love to be personality-wise Pierce Brosnan, but I don't think I'm cool enough for that. As great as Roger is, no one seems to see him as cool anymore, so I could probably fit into that quite well. I think I said to someone once on a date years ago, charm is my only weapon. So it's again, I think I could probably have the charm of Roger Moore, just not the looks, I think, unfortunately. So, but no, I love his personality. I think genuinely does fit my personality. I love other films like Gladiator, and I don't really fit into the Russell Crowe. I'm going to go on a revengeful killing spree. But I think with Bond, for whatever reason, I think he does very much fit my personality.
Thank you, Stuart. That's it's been fascinating to hear your insights, your thoughts on all things Bond. I think there's a lot of similarities to what some Jay and I's thoughts, and a lot of differences as well. So it's good to hear a third point of view and get all your thoughts on all things Bond in terms of rankings and feelings. So we really appreciate you coming on the show. Thank you so much for taking the time. And to the listeners out there, thank you for listening. We're going to have more of these specials coming soon with more Bond superfans, so stay tuned for those. And in the meantime, we'll see you again soon, right here on The Rating Room.
Well, that's this week's episode done. We hope you enjoyed it.
Special thanks to the band Sugar Tongue for the theme tune to The Rating Room. You can find them on all the usual social media channels. And be sure to check out their song The System, available now on Spotify.
You can find and message us on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram by searching The Rating Room.
You'll find all our social media links on our website, theratingroom.com, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Or feel free to drop us an email at theratingroom@gmail.com. Goodbye, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week, right here on The Rating Room.